A couple of days ago, I asked the herd for your craziest Warhammer hot takes, and you guys did not disappoint. Some of you came in swinging with pure power scaling confidence, like saying Angron is a top 3 Primarch of all time, which is quite a bold take. Others decided to declare that Warhammer 40K video games shouldn't be canon at all, or that the Primarchs suck and should not return to the modern setting. And then some of you looked at the entire greenskin race and said they should all be retconned. At that point, I realized something very important. Some of you are absolutely unhinged. So today, in typical Falling Cow fashion, we are rating your hot takes and then ranking them using the most scientifically accurate system ever devised. From Golden Udder all the way down to Curdled Slaanesh Warp Milk. And I'm warning you all, some of these takes are based, some are even defensible, but some of you need to genuinely be handed over to the Inquisition. It may not be time to power scale, but the cowhole still awaits. Let's jump straight into it, fellas. This is rating and ranking your Warhammer 40K hot takes. Alright, here's how it's going to work. From all the submissions I received on this YouTube post, I randomly selected 10 of them. If your take didn't make it into this batch, don't worry, that doesn't mean it wasn't good enough or insane enough. It just means it didn't get pulled this time. If this video does well enough, we can absolutely do a part 2. Maybe we even do a version focused purely on Warhammer 40K power scaling.
Shut up and take my money.
Now for each of these 10 takes, I'm doing 3 things. First, I'm rating the take. That means I'm judging the eternal logic, the lore consistency, and how well it holds up under scrutiny. Second, I'm ranking it relative to the other takes. Because not all wild takes are created equal. There's a difference between mildly spicy opinion and something that feels like it crawled straight out of Slaanesh's butt. And finally, each take will be placed on a cow's tier list. At the very top, we have the Golden Udder tier. These are elite takes, based, either fully correct or so convincing that they earn genuine respect. These are the kinds of opinions that make you pause and say, you know what? That actually makes sense. Below that is full cream. These are strong, flavorful takes. Maybe a little spicy, maybe stretching things slightly, but still grounded enough to stand on their own. You might not agree completely, but you can see their reasoning. Then we have skim milk. These takes aren't completely wrong, but they're on thin ice. The logic is underdeveloped, the evidence is light, or the argument needs more substance. There's something there, it just doesn't hit as hard as it should. After that comes spoiled milk. These are flawed takes, lore bending, emotionally driven, or built on shaky foundations. Maybe they sound good at first glance, but once you actually think about them, the cracks start to show. And finally, at the bottom of the abyss, we have Curdled Slaanesh Warp Milk. These are completely unhinged takes. The ones that contradict themselves, ignore established canon, or feel like they were typed under the influence. The kind of opinions that make the Inquisition start drafting paperwork. So that's how we're going to be doing today's video. 10 randomly selected hot takes, rated for logic, ranked against each other, and sorted from Golden Udder to full-blown Slaanesh Warp Milk. Now, let's get to these heinous hot takes. Our first hot take comes from Musty Lawyer. And he said Conrad Kurz would have been way more interesting if he never went traitor and stayed exactly the same morally and mentally, just technically loyal. Now before I analyze this, for those who don't know, Musty is actually my lawyer. He once got me out of a very serious legal situation in Japan involving me and an attempted cow theft. It's a long story, which we'll unpack at another time. But just know if you need legal help, call Musty Lawyer. So this take is essentially keeping Conrad Kurz exactly as he is, flaying criminals, executing people based on future visions, building a flesh statue of the Emperor that he talks to during the heresy, but somehow he remains technically loyal to the Imperium. I'll be honest, on a conceptual level, that's extremely interesting. The idea of Kurz fighting alongside the Lion or Rabute Gilliman while still being completely insane has some serious narrative potential. The problem is that to make this work, you'd have to fundamentally change who Conrad Kurz is. Before Istvan even happens, he's already destroyed his homeworld of Nostramo and is operating outside Imperial authority. He's effectively a renegade before the heresy officially begins. And this is because his entire character arc revolves around his foresight, which convinces him that everything is predetermined, including his own death. That death is essential to his identity. He believes he will die at the hands of the Emperor, which ultimately happens when the Kaladas assassin, Mashin, executes him and vindicates his vision. If you keep him the same mentally and morally, but just label him as a loyalist, it kinda just falls apart. His madness, nihilism, and obsession with destiny are precisely what pushes him towards rebellion. You can't really separate his psychological state from his character without changing his entire character arc. Now you could create a version where his descent into madness is slower, or where, the Emperor is actually a good father, like we see in other AUs like the Dorian or Rabute heresies, which I love those AUs. But in every one of those scenarios, something core about Conrad Kurz's character shifts. He isn't fully the same insane character anymore. So while this is a cool hot take and genuinely interesting from a storytelling perspective, it doesn't hold up if he remains exactly as he's written. For that reason, I'm placing this take firmly in skim milk. It's not spoiled, it's not delusional, it's creative, but it's on thin ice unless you rewrite the foundation of his character. Still, solid food for thought. Thanks, Musty. Our next take comes from Skin Fluid Hero 4885. Sanguinius in a small room gets bodied by half the Primarchs. Now, wow, this is quite the take, because what you're really saying here is that if you remove his ability to fly, Sanguinius drops out of that top tier conversation and starts losing to other high tier Primarchs like Lionel Johnson, Fulgrim, Lehman Russ, Conrad Kurz, or Angron. And before I give a verdict, I will say his flight definitely matters. One of the main reasons Sanguinius is able to take down Titans so frequently is because of his flight, as he can get close enough to target vulnerable points like the head or the cockpit while dodging incoming fire. Remove that ability and yes, you are taking away a major advantage. So there is some truth there, but, and this is a big but, I still think this is a spoiled milk take. Even without flight, we have direct evidence that Sanguinius performs at an absurd level in close quarters combat. In the book Pharos, he fights Conrad Kurz while effectively wearing a bathrobe and wielding a ceremonial blade and still manages to draw with him thanks to his foresight. They fought around the throne hall, the Angel and the Night Haunter, at speeds the normal human eye would struggle to follow. They matched each other blow for blow. Both saw their foe's next move before it occurred and countered appropriately. Sanguinius' visions, ordinarily so infrequent, poured through his head in a maddening torrent. For long minutes they clashed, neither able to gain the advantage. This is the same Kurz who held his own against both the Lion and Gilliman simultaneously in Unremembered Empire. For Sanguinius to match him without his full war gear, without Encarmine or Telesto, and without relying on aerial dominance is insanely impressive. Then we get to the end and the death, where Sanguinius fights God Emperor Horus at the height of his power. During their fight, Sanguinius is described as moving faster than the speed of light. He isn't there, he slipped aside, a flash of gold as fast as a sunbeam, evading you at the speed of light. Yes, Horus ultimately no-diffs him once he stops holding back, but that's Ascended, Chaos-empowered Horus. That's not a normal scaling reference point for the rest of the base Primarchs. So even if you lock Sanguinius in a small room and clip his wings, you're still left with one of the greatest duelists among the Primarchs, enhanced by Foresight, Battle Instinct, and Focused Rage. At bare minimum, he's still a top 5 Primarch, and if we're talking base, non-demonic, non-psychic amplified forms, I would honestly argue top 3 is still very defensible. So while I respect the observation that flight is a huge part of his kit, saying half the Primarchs body him without it goes too far. That's why it lands in spoiled milk for me. It's not completely delusional, but it underestimates just how absurd Sanguinius is, even when grounded. At the end of the day, he is still him. Thanks for the comment. This one was a lot of fun. Our third hot take comes from its Alan Wow. The Homunculaba is one of the best and most efficient advancements, just perfectly Iron Warrior too.
No, stop! What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?
Wow, that is definitely a statement. For those who don't know, the Homunculaba, as seen in Dead Sky, Black Sun, is a grotesque method of mass-producing Astartes by surgically and chemically altering enslaved women into living birthing vessels. Adolescent boys are implanted inside these modified wombs along with corrupted gene seed and broken down genetic material from dead space marines. The process either transforms the child into a warped space marine or results in catastrophic mutation. Now, in terms of function, I actually understand this take. Chaos warbands don't have stable infrastructure. They don't have reliable apothecaries. And they don't have recruitment worlds like Loyalist Marines. The Homunculaba bypasses all of that. It allows the Iron Warriors to replenish numbers without relying on traditional, far more selective processes like Loyalist Astartes. From a purely siege mindset, it is brutally efficient at producing bodies. But efficient does not mean optimal. The failure rate is extremely high. The psychological stability of the survivors is questionable at best. Many are effectively feral or barely conditioned. Even when successful, the resulting Marine is still inferior in discipline and skill compared to a traditionally raised and trained Loyalist Astartes. It produces soldiers, but not necessarily elite warriors of the same consistent caliber. But for the Iron Warriors, the Legion of Attrition, Siegecraft, Bitterness, and Cold Calculus, this method is thematically perfect. The 4th Legion does not care about elegance, but replacing losses and overwhelming foes. A high death rate and grotesque inefficiency would be unacceptable to the Ultramarines, but to the Iron Warriors, it is just acceptable loss ratios. So I'm putting this in full cream, because it perfectly aligns with Iron Warriors doctrine and chaos practicality. Thanks, it's Alan Wow for this hot take. Coming in as our 4th hot take is Crabzilla's The Crave should have killed the lion and became the big bads of the setting. And oh boy, oh my, there is a lot to unpack here. First, let's discuss what the Crave actually are. The Crave, also known as the Mind Eaters, are an ancient psychic xeno species, possibly older than even the Eldari Empire. They are described as bat-like creatures larger than humans, existing simultaneously in real space and the immaterium. Their true forms are massive root minds, which psychically dominate lesser organisms and biological hosts. Each root mine can enslave entire worlds, spreading like a psychic contagion by feeding on paranoia, mistrust, and eternal decay. What Crab is specifically referencing is the lion's encounter with the Crave in the book Lord of the First. After infiltrating one of their hosts onto the Dark Angel's flagship, the Invincible Reason, the Crave attempt to seize control of the Dark Angel's fleet. The lion ultimately fights one of them in the hangar bay twice. First physically, where he overwhelms the host, but then the Crave fights him psychically. And this is where things get quite interesting. Inside the mental landscape of the lion, the docking bay fades into a shadowed forest of Caliban. Here the lion takes control yet again and lifts the Xenos by the throat. Her eyes bulged, her feet kicking futilely as she scratched at his forearms. The leaves of the shadowed forest rustled, and wavering as she did so, but no relief or rescue broke through the reality that the Primarch had constructed. The Lion was the master of all his domains. You have dived willingly into a Primarch's mind, and for that hubris alone, you deserve this failure. So yes, the Lion emerges the victor, beating them both physically and psychically. Now, Crab's hot take is that not only should the Lion have died here, but the Crave should have been the ultimate threat of the setting.
You're not making any sense at all.
And while that's certainly a bold subversion, it would fundamentally destabilize the heresy and the broader 40K narrative, killing off one of the most important and let alone powerful loyalist Primarchs to a Xeno species that barely appears again would feel like a completely strange 180. The Horse Heresy is built around Chaos versus the Imperium, shifting it to Imperium versus a random ancient psychic bat race would fracture the spine of the entire 30K saga. The Great Crusade already has external existential threats, like the Rang Dang or the Orcs, and does not lack for alien horrors. More importantly, the Lion's victory already establishes a ceiling on the Crave's threat level. If a root mind can't overpower a Primarch's mind, then they are not the apex setting villains. Could they have been used more? Sure, they're a pretty cool species. They look like Batman, but really evil. But making them the central antagonists by killing the Lion would have hamstrung the heresy and weakened the overall plot. So I'm going to be slotting this in as our first curdled Slaanesh warp milk pick. I'm sorry, Crab, but this is a freezing cold take. The fifth hot take we have on our list comes from Khorne himself. Yes, Khorne, the god of blood and war, has spoken, declaring, "Demons are the single most disrespected and spat on faction by GW's writing in all of Warhammer, and it's not even close." Honestly, it's kind of fitting that this is coming from the Blood God. And I'm going to say it plainly, this is 100% correct. Tell me folks, when was the last time a demon, greater demon, or even demon Primarch decisively defeated a major named character and it actually stuck? Just think about it. Angron loses to Lionel Johnson in the Ark of Omens, Mortarion technically defeated Rabute Guilliman, only for Guilliman to get revived by the Emperor and then Mortarion got banished anyways. Magnus the Red gets defeated by Guilliman and the Sisters of Silence, and the pattern goes on and on and on. A big scary demon shows up, makes a big speech, looks terrifying for about 12 pages, and then loses. Sure, Chaos as a faction has had major wins in recent lore, like Acadia or Wormwood, but when it comes to one-on-one confrontations against named protagonists, the demons are allergic to finishing the job. They exist to raise the stakes and then be banished so the hero can have their moment. Take, for example, Kairos Fateweaver, the supposed all-seeing Oracle of Tzeentch, and now a declared fraud. A being who perceives every possible timeline, but whenever he fights, he loses. He gets taken down by several opponents, including a Nemesis Dread Knight, which, let's be honest, looks like a bootleg mech from Pacific Rim, designed by someone who thought subtlety was heresy. You're telling me the Oracle of Tzeentch, master of causality, couldn't foresee getting suplexed by a walking baby carrier? Come on now, GW. I mean, greater demons are described as reality warping manifestations of gods, demon Primarchs are immortal demigods juiced on warp steroids, but narratively, they function like Saturday morning cartoon villains. Terrifying in lore, disposable in practice. And that's why this take earns the Golden Udder tier. Khorne is absolutely right. Demons, especially the big ones, are constantly used as hype tools, rather than allowed to be enduring threats. They win wars in the background, but they lose duels in the spotlight. So yes, Mr. Blood for the Blood God here currently sits at the top of my rankings with the best take. Will he remain as the top take? Make your bets, people. Make your bets. Moving to our sixth hot take, which comes from Metalworkers Machinations. Belisarius Call could 1v1 a Custodes, and I would also be willing to argue that he could put up a reasonable fight against someone on the level of Alfarius or Megon. Now this could low genuinely be its own full power scaling video, because Belisarius Call is one of the most requested characters on my channel to power scale, but let's quickly talk about how powerful he is. Call is an 11,000-year-old Archmagos Dominus who has rebuilt himself countless times, turning his body into a walking weapon platform. He stands far taller than a normal man, processes information at speeds bordering on picoseconds, and can run complex calculations while fighting. He can tear apart Astartes and carries the Solar Atomizer, a concentrated melta-based weapon that can tear through war engines. On top of that, he feels little pain and has layer redundancies built into his consciousness. So could he 1v1 a Custodian? Honestly, I would say yes, that's very plausible. The Adeptus Custodes are monsters far beyond standard Astartes, but Call's shields, intelligence, and weaponry gives him the tools to probably be able to defeat one. At the minimum, he's operating at the top of the enhanced tier, but compared to Primarchs like Alpharius or Omegon is where things get a little difficult. Primarchs are gene-forged demigods with warp abilities. Even the lower end Primarchs are in an entirely different physical level. We're talking beings who can fight avatars of Cain, greater demons, and most mortal characters in the 40K universe. Simply put, I don't see Call beating a Primarch in a straight-up fight. Could he put up a fight though? I could see it being low to mid-diff for the Primarchs, as his tech alone would force them to take him seriously. But winning, I don't think so. Overall, this is a very solid take. For that reason, I'm putting this in full cream, slightly ahead of the Demon Culpa. Call is quite powerful, and people sometimes underestimate just how absurd he really is. Another strong take. The 7th hot take comes from Tucker Wig. The Tau will eventually become the strongest faction. Now this is definitely one of the crazier takes when you stack up the Tau against some of the other heavyweights of the setting like the Necrons, a civilization that once shattered the Catan and commands planet-erasing weaponry, or the Tyranids, a hive mind that consumes entire star systems as a matter of routine. The Tau don't exactly scream future apex predator of the galaxy with their communism and Gundam suits. Even looking at their strongest beings, the gap feels noticeable. For example, Commander Farsight is one of their greatest, and while he's incredibly capable, he was not able to defeat a Swarm Lord by himself. So in the present timeline, no, I don't see the Tau even cracking the top 5 in factions. However, and this is important, the take does say eventually. The Tau are the youngest major faction, and arguably the fastest growing in terms of technological advancement. Their innovation curve is steep and they don't stagnate the way the Imperium does. Their battle suits, rail weaponry, and expansion doctrine already punch above their demographic weight. If you give them thousands of years of uninterrupted development, it is plausible that their technology could scale to a level where they compete far more directly with the galaxy's ancient powers. But we are talking about someday. A distant, hypothetical future where everything goes right for them, which in 40K is a very big assumption. So I can't put this in curdled Slaanesh warp milk because it's not completely impossible, but it's also not grounded in the current power structure of the setting. For that reason, this lands in spoiled milk. It's ambitious, forward-thinking, and maybe a tad bit optimistic, but for now, the Tau are still playing catch-up in a galaxy ruled by monsters. The 8th hot take on our list comes from Heretic 7025, and it is simple, direct, and a tad bit silly. Orcs should be retconned. Yes, the entire race. I'll start by saying this. In the current setting, the Orcs don't always get treated like the galactic menace the lore suggests they should be. Their strongest figure, Gazkul Mak Uruk Thraka, famously lost his head to Ragnar Blackmane, a simple space wolf. You could argue Gazgul wanted that outcome, that it served a bigger purpose in gaining him more power. But moments like that make the faction feel like it's being used as more of a narrative stepping stone than an existential threat. but I still don't think that means they should be entirely retconned. The orcs are one of the foundational pillars of Warhammer 40K. They are the setting's chaotic absurdity warped around genuine horror. On the surface, they're comic relief. A race of hooligans who fight because fighting is fun. They paint things to go faster. They shout their way through physics, but underneath that humor is something deeply unsettling. They are self-sustaining, spore-based war species engineered for endless conflict. They reproduce through war, and wherever they go, civilizations eventually collapse into perpetual battlefields. Every major faction fills a distinct role in the ecosystem of 40K. The Imperium represents decaying stagnation, chaos embodies corruption and damnation. The Necrons are undying and ancient skeleton boys, and the Tyranids are consumption without reason. The Orcs, they are endless war in its most primal form. Conflict stripped of ideology, religion, or morality. Just violence for its own sake. Remove them and there would be a massive hole in both the narrative and the balance of 40K. The setting becomes more sterile and less chaotic in the worst way possible. Also, that would mean getting rid of the phrase, whack! And we can't have that, fellas. So while I understand frustration with how they're sometimes handled, retcon the orcs entirely is a bit extreme, my man. This is going straight into curdled Slaanesh warp milk. And I'm putting it in the very, very back. This one makes the other controversial takes look tame. Heretic, I respect the boldness, but this is one freezing ice cold take. Davey Intrek 399, I hope I said your username right, comes in as our 9th hot take. Alpha Primus could body most of the Primarchs, and you know what? I really do love this take. For those unfamiliar, Alpha Primus is Call's mysterious proto-Primarch, as seen in Belisarius' Call, the Great Work. Though it's unclear exactly what Alpha Primus is, it's heavily implied that he is a genetic child created by using Call's DNA and the DNA of all the Primarchs. Yes, let's be honest, Alpha Primus is absolutely a statement merchant, because he has several statements that hype him up a ton. According to Belisarius' Call, the Great Work, his psychic powers are unparalleled compared to the rest of the Adeptus Astartes. And the scaling implications for that statement are insane, because technically that would put him above Mephiston or Tigurus. But actual combat feats are rather limited. We do see him punch through a ship's bulkhead and deliver blows strong enough to instantly kill a mortal man, which isn't the most impressive of feats. As for psychic powers, we do see him be able to manipulate objects through telekinesis, or even snatch and crush enemy weapons mid-combat. But to be honest, that's about it. Normally, this is where I would pump the brakes, but as a great fan of other statement merchants throughout the setting, like the greatest bald menace in the galaxy, Horus Lubercal, during his Great Crusade Prime, I have a soft spot for characters who are built on one or two statements. Sometimes aura is all that matters. However, while I was researching Alpha Primus specifically for this take, I came across a passage of 2 Ultramarine guards talking about him, and the knowledge passed to them by Rabute Gilliman. And from that, it appears that Gilliman is not threatened by Alpha Primus. You could interpret that in multiple different ways, but I believe that places Alpha Primus below all of the Primarchs. Because if Alpha Primus was truly on a Primarch's level, then Gilliman would have expressed concern about that, and we would have seen it in this passage. We see even more of this from 5 Questions, where Alpha Primus questions a demon about his identity. "Then am I a Primarch?" he blurted. The thing's answer was cryptic. "What are the Anathema's sons, but too much spirit and too little flesh? What is a nightmare if not the same? Am I a nightmare like them? You are a shadow. They are the darkness. 2, 1, we are done." So with this evidence, even though he's stated to be a psyker of unparalleled power, it appears that Alpha Primus is not on Primarch level. So unfortunately, this take isn't correct. But since I love Alpha Primus so much, I'm going to place this in the back of the full cream tier. Great take though. I hope we get more lore on Alpha Primus in the future as this setting progresses. Our 10th and final hot take comes from Oha Match Hams. I have no idea if that's how you say your username. Warhammer 40K isn't that overpowered compared to other sci-fi franchises, let alone other fiction. But giving limitations and mortality to its gods and factions is what makes 40K work with its grim, stagnant, declining end times themes. This is a very interesting and actually thoughtful take. But on the surface, 40K absolutely has some outrageous powerhouses. You've got the Emperor at his peak, the Star-devouring Catan in their uncharted forms, the ancient Eldar gods before their fall, and of course, the Chaos gods. All of these entities are capable of destroying planets, systems, and possibly realities. And that's not even mentioning the Dark King from the End and the Death, the apocalyptic possibility of the Emperor ascending to the 5th Chaos God of Ruin, being implied to be the destruction of the universe as we know it. His ascension would distort reality on a universal scale and eclipse even the established powers of the warp. In many other sci-fi settings, entities like that would be end-of-series threats or multiversal ending final bosses. I mean, if we compare 40K to, say, Star Wars or Star Trek, I can't think of any entity that would even be able to remotely challenge the Dark King. Of course, if you disagree with me, let me know down in the comments. But that's where the second point of this hot take comes in. These beings almost never directly operate in real space at full capacity. The Chaos Gods act through champions and demons, the Catan are currently shattered, the Emperor is entombed on the Golden Throne, the Eldar Gods are dead, shattered, or diminished, and even the Dark King scenario is a path not taken. At least, not now. The setting constantly builds these cosmic ceilings and then enforces barriers so they can't physically interact with the universe. That limitation is not a weakness of the verse, it's the point. 40K thrives on stagnation, decay, and powers that are vast but restrained, broken, or self-limiting. These restrictions preserve the tone of 40K, stopping it from immediately entering the end times. So I actually agree with the spirit of this take. Yes, 40K absolutely has universe-threatening entities, but the narrative of the setting stops them from doing anything meaningful. I'm putting this in full cream towards the back of the tier, but still solid. So those are our 10 hot takes. Let's summarize who is the best and who is the worst. Demons being bums, courtesy of Korn himself, is officially sitting at the top of the rankings in Golden Utter tier. That take is by far my favorite, and exposes a real pattern in how greater demons and demon primarchs in general get handled on page. The Blood God takes the crown in this video. Meanwhile, Retcon the Orcs is firmly locked as the worst hot take of today's video. Deleting an entire foundational faction from the setting, that's a freezing cold take. The Green Menaces have to stay. But hey, at the end of the day, these are all valid opinions being judged by a silly little cow with a milk chart and too much time spent reading Warhammer lore. Once again, if your take didn't show up, don't worry, that means it didn't get pulled this time. If you guys want a part 2, or a fully unhinged power scaling edition where we can argue about top 3 Primarchs until reality fractures harder than Cadia, let me know down in the comments. A huge shout out to my Patreon and YouTube members, Lag, Seth Capizilla, Keydree, Caleb White, Dinkleberry, Musty, and Impossible Paul. You guys are the absolute top goes, and I appreciate each and every one of you. I just returned from Japan, and let me tell you, March is going to be one hectic month. We're finally covering who is the most powerful Marine in all of Warhammer 40K, as well as me power scaling who are the top 15 strongest beings in the entire verse. So make sure you stay milked, because March is going to be one power scaling spectacular month. Stay milked, fellas, and I'll see you all real soon.